After that hot gospeler has leveled all but the churched sky, I wrote the tale by Tallow of a city's death by fire.
I grew up around the square. I first lived on Brazil Street, and then we moved to our building across the church, right across the church. As a matter of fact, the wall that you see by the courthouse is the wall of our building, still there. And we had quite a big building, 2 stories, and that's where. So I grew up around there. Now at our time, the square was our playground. And we had a Mr. Salmon, who was a judge. When we tried to play cricket, they had palm trees on the square. So we tried to destroy it because you put the palm trees as a wicket. So we had a lot of fun, but that's where we grew up. Castries is always very well defined. I would believe this because there was a fire in 1927. And when they rebuilt in a proper manner, proper structure towards something. But everything's Castries. Growing up to money on the top was nothing money already, just a few homes, like the Thibbers and all of those were there, Gregor Peter on there. And then you had Plapanse, you had Alan Peter going up there. So all of that. It was, so Castries was the town, and all of us lived in town in Castries.
One of the things I remember going and looking out is the Upper Bridge Street. The houses there were really nice little houses built away from the street with wrought iron and so on, and it was where the elite lived, the French. And it's only when I went to France I saw similar houses.
I can remember where the statue of Compton, around there, around that area there. There's a beautiful building there, and that was belonging to the Masons Lodge. Beautiful white building. Well, when I tell you, nice design, white, well painted, always right around there. I can remember that as a kid. You know, you did not have a boulevard. All that was street. Now the town board was somewhere, what you call council now, was way down. Castries town board. It was somewhere down, I don't know if it's Victoria Street, but more to the west of the city. And these people had nothing to fight fire, you know. Nothing to fight fire. A little cat with a few holes inside of that. When you had fire, shoo, fellas run to that and could never touch that fire, you know. Never. We did not have equipment.
Under candle's eye that smoked in cheers, I wanted to tell, in more than wax, of faiths that were snapped like wire.
We were having supper, and it was then we heard sirens. So it was that. Then when he said there's a fire all the way up St. Louis Street, so that was a little fire. So he said a tailor shop. So it was a small thing, so we didn't worry about that. Then more noise, and people said the fire coming down, smoke coming down. Till my mother said, listen to me, this is getting serious, you'll have to move. Luckily my sister was married to Reggie Clark, and they lived at Rock Hall. So all of us went up to Rock Hall, away from Castries. But from there we could see the fire, what it was doing to Castries. It was not easy, it wasn't nice. It was not nice at all.
Because that was been about 8 o'clock. I was at home, Trinity Church Road, opposite the steps going to the church. And when I heard fire, you know, children are curious. We came out to see what it was. But my parents wouldn't let me go down by the fire. So I went up the steps, the Anglican church steps, and I stayed up there, and that's where I looked at the fire, the whole town on fire. I never moved, I never went anywhere but just on that step there. I stayed until morning because we were afraid that we don't know how far the fire would reach. So we were on the alert in case we had to move ourselves. But still, and all we started moving things, you know. We didn't know how far, and the fire was just at the corner there and blazed up the whole of Castries.
And the night of the fire, it was, well, boy, I can tell you, all kinds of people started running. All over the place, because that was not easy. Those who could get help, those who could not get help. Well, some of them, well, those who were able to serve, whatever they saved was not much anyway. Because this fire came like a raging bull. And it was going, and meeting those kind of houses is just a matter of, you know, because so many, I won't call them derelict houses because people lived in them, but mostly all the wooden structures, little wooden structures, some of them big too. Some of them were very, very, you know, rotten, and the fire made mincemeat of that. When my mother decided to pack up, I can remember that. First thing she did was to take out her mattress, a cotton mattress. And she's saying, how will she carry her? Where will she go with the mattress? Now we had a friend called Muffet living that mansion. I told my mother, wrap up and tie the mattress, put it on my head for me, and I carried it to mansion. But next day I couldn't take it and bring it back home. But the night, God gave me the strength for me to do that.
I went to my father's place and tell him, look, there's a fire going on. And I went back to the scene of the fire. So the smoking continued, and then you have suddenly you see flames and more smoke. And then as the heat increased, people started to move back. Then after a while you see the building on the other side start to smoke. Unfortunately it was a rum shop, so before too long you heard "Patow!" The bottle break, more smokes. So people started back here. So the guys, my father-in-law, came in with their fire engine. They didn't have an engine, they had a little caboose. And they had their hose in it, they take the hose and they roll it out and they hold the hose, put it to the hydrant, screw it on thing, and then turn the water on. Turn the water on, no water at the end of the hose. What you saw is little streams of water, you shwee, 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 shwee at the end of the road. So there was no water to add the fire. So the fire continued, and after a while you heard "Patow!" and then the boom. It was the rum drums that were exploding. And you'll see those shafts of lightning, not lightning, but smoke and everything going up to the sky. And everywhere was orange, red and orange. The sky everywhere. And boy, you say, shit, that was what hell must be like.
I was the eldest of 8, and the night of the fire, when I was told, stay in the house and take care of the young ones. And my parents left, and they ran out, and I looked out of the window and I saw people just rushing down. In those days, Leslieland wasn't as it is now. It was much lower. And it wasn't even called Leslieland, it was called Mbamongo. And people just rushed, and then I just saw people just coming back and dropping things all over, in front of my house, in front of my mother's house. And well, I couldn't go out because I had to take care of the little ones because they were babies and toddlers, and that was my responsibility. But the house was full of furniture. People were just coming, dropping things and going, and this is what I remember.
I remember I was getting ready to go to a party. I'd left school, and the fire started like everything else. It was small. It was in St. Louis Street, at the corner of St. Louis Street, way up. So, like everybody else running around, we went to look at the fire. My brothers and I were more or less separated. And when we got there and the fire began to engulf some of the smaller buildings, we got together. We helped people. Try to help them. We helped with the hose, but that wasn't very good. I mean, the hose got cut. It was terrible. The lack of equipment was. And that night, there was a lot of wind. And the wind came apparently from all sources. It was pandemonium that night. And every time the wind came and the flames, it burned the pitch. It was terrible. I went back to see what my mother was in a dreadful state and fearful because all her sons, 3 sons, everybody, nobody there to help her out. Anyway, so we decided to try to move stuff from home up the more opposite the police station, where a friend of ours, the Eudoxes, lived. Put it there. But after a while, we couldn't do anything because the flames had passed, so we couldn't even cross. So we lost almost 7/8 of our stuff. Yes. That was near the 4 o'clock in the morning, 4, 5 in the morning, when the flames reached the wharf, the whole that western wharf. Yes, it was a disastrous experience, overwhelming.
The day we got this call, the Castries fire, in June, when we arrived on the scene there, the place was well alight. The fire started at one Adonis, a tailor shop. Next corner there was a rum shop, Nedzi. The water we had, the fire was too advanced. Couldn't do much. What happened to us again, behind that Nedzi place there, they had what you call, they used to collect their rum at the back. And where the fire started is a wooden place apparently. That was there already. It burned and it got to the drum. And to tell you, explosion and that going. That's the time we started getting fire, galvanized, going all around the place. We couldn't handle this fire. What we did was to try and break buildings, fire approaching them, and break them off and so on, put them down until the fire ceases. But the boys couldn't do much. It was 4 of us. And we had no backup support.
All day I walked abroad among the rubble tales, shocked at each wall that stood on the street like a liar.
When you came down, we saw desolation. You cried because everything you had, your home was gone, your memory of sports, everything was gone. You just had one section remain, all the rest went. 3/4 of the town went in that whole fire. The only thing that remained, the college remained, part of the convent remained, and the Ave Maria school remained. But the rest of that, up in the northern part of town, remained thing there, because my grandmother lived almost best below the chaussee, and High Street, that remained.
Next day, people went, you saw cats like that, you saw dogs, you saw, because, I mean, the people were able to run, but where the dogs would go, where the cats would go, you think that's not what you would try and save. You try and save your little child, but not a cat and a dog. You see them, they were so, the dogs, the cats. Oh, that was something to see. Who didn't see that, who didn't experience that?
A lot of people got burnt out, a lot. A lot. Big people, small people, call them poor people if you want to call them. But a lot of people, because of the way this town was structured, we had a lot of wooden houses, old houses, and all that went flat. Because the Sunday morning when I went, it was a Sunday, I think Saturday, Sunday, I can't fully remember now, Tetlapa Jela. When I looked, and I stood up somewhere by the church there, and I looked down there, it was not a nice sight. Not a nice sight. The whole of Jeremy Street there, everything there. Jeremy Street, Victoria Street, St. Louis Street, High Street, all that. Miko Street, flat down. Flat down. You see. It was not a pleasant scene at all.
Now, Castries burnt from Jeremy Street. You go way down the bank, all the way down to where Bandag was before, along the river, by the bridge. You come up, you turn, you go towards the library, you miss the square, you go up Meekwood Street and back to Carl Street. So everything in that area was burned down. Two little things to say was a little building at the corner of Miku and Carl Street, and the buildings, a few wooden buildings at the bottom of what you call Shitali, the bottom of Miku Street. So these were the only things that survived the fire. So I walked around town. What I noticed was that the pitch, the asphalted roads, had all broken up. The buildings were still smoldering from the night before. Material made out of steel or iron was all twisted. Heavy wooden beams and columns, once they got burnt, it formed an insulated, so they stayed. So you see all the twisted metal, but the solid wooden beam stayed. You walked around town, completely deserted. But what struck me most was the smell of burning saltfish. Everywhere you go in that smoke.
The following day, I was allowed to not go too far, but just a little place. And what hit me for a long time after was the smell of roasted saltfish. And up to now, whenever I hear of the 1948 fire, I associate it with burnt saltfish, roasting saltfish, because the place was really destroyed. And the Carnegie Library, that's how it was called then, now it was, remained burning for a long time after. The structure didn't get burnt because you can see it now, it was rebuilt. But the contents, because it was books, stayed burning for a long time.
Following day I was dazed. I don't know whether I was walking or standing up. Totally dazed. Anybody who looked around during days would not be telling the truth. It was an experience that I hope that will never be repeated in my life. Everything flat, burnt, smelling dead animals, smelling burnt, all sorts of burnt, different types of things that are burning. Dreadful. Dazed. You don't know where you're walking and you don't know where you're going. Don't realize where you're going to sleep.
Loud was the bird-rocked sky, and all the clouds were bales, torn open by looting and white in spite of the fire. By the smoking sea where Christ walked, I asked, why should a man wax tears when his wooden world fails?
Everybody was despondent. What do we do? We didn't know what we were going to do. When we had to move to my grandmother's, because she was on High Street, top of the Chaussee High Street, until we built our house in the Caille. She had built in 1949. So it took us a year to moving, doing that, preparing for the house. So we did that. So a lot of people went through that same process of having to rebuild outside the town, etc. And so the Judas were our neighbor, and we built next to each other also. So all the Judas and get Harry, built up the Mourne. All of us moved out of town where we were because we had to redo that. It was a relocation of our whole way of life. And town became a pure business sector, no longer a living hunting sector. The only thing that remained, the college remained, part of the convent remained, and the Ave Maria School remained. But the rest of that, of the northern part of town remained thing there, because my grandmother lived almost best below the chaussee and High Street, that remained.
Castries was mainly in the town, the flat in town, and little sprungs like La Pensée and Mondudon and Marchand. So people who lived in town were homeless. So what they had to do was to quickly clean up the barracks building that still have roofs on it. And that was where they housed the people. People who had relatives went to other places, some went to Soufrière to different distances. But it was absolute chaos because the shops were burnt, the food, the traditional food you get, your sardines and so, that was all gone in the fire.
After that, my father was very busy because people who owned property in town had to register. And there were lots of small lots because there were lots of people in Castries who owned property. And all of this was burnt. Castries had to be rebuilt. So the people had to register as homeowners or renters or whatever. And then I remember they gave people fire relief. And the people who qualified for fire relief were first and foremost land owners.
Amma Ambrose was the first to reorganize his bakery. First to organize his bakery. And with burnt, galvanized as covers. Tremendous courage and dedication. It was so people assembled quietly and put their things together to begin their life. There was no electricity because that was burnt. The water, no water because of, or very little because some of the pipes were burnt and so forth. And people running around, walking around days for weeks. Had to go into shelters. Fortunately for us at the time, the government of St. Lucia was still a colony, were able to get the military buildings, which the military buildings were owned by the military from England, and they allowed these buildings to be used to help out people for housing. And that's where we stayed until we built at VG. We were lucky, when you say we, the St. Lucia was lucky, Castries was lucky that we had those military buildings to be able to house people. Otherwise, I don't know what we'd have done.
In town, leaves were paper, but the hills were a flock of thieves. To a boy who walked all day, each leaf was a green breath, rebuilding a love I thought was dead as nails, blessing the death and the baptism by fire.
They had to find housing for people. And the British were very much, because we were very much a colony at the time. So they brought in a company called HH&C, Holland, Hanel, and Cubits. And they were the ones who did the construction of the CDCs. Now I explained to you the 4 stories have a sort of floating foundation. Because, as I thought I heard, I told them, I'm not too sure, there was a chaussee as the only road. All the rest was land, refill land. So they didn't want to put these high buildings on with things that had a floating foundation. So that was how they housed most of the people who didn't have access to finance like a few of us had, and the CDCs were done for them. 4-story blocks and the others were done. I think the CDCs maintained the Castries image because those who are living around came back into the CDCs. The others like us, we were just on the perimeter. So we never left Castries. I was what they call the Calle. I was on the Calle, as you would know. So I was still in Castries. The McNamara's were down where Seventh-day Adventist Church is now. So we were still, the avenues were on top of the hill there. So although we moved out of town, we're not out of town, really out of town. So there was a change of scenery, a change of thing. You would just move on the hill next to us. So in that way, you move it because the CDCs are built, you still had the people from Castries still in Castries. So it's not really a moving of people. There was a transition period, and luckily the British came in very quickly and did what they had to do. Two things that came about as a result of the fire. Well, that business more in concrete. Our house, big as it was a wooden house. I'd be painted almost every 2 years, a big wooden house, on pillars and everything. So most of the houses in town were just correct were in there. But what was one of the major things was the sewage. We didn't have sewage before. We didn't have sewage before. So the fire brought in and the sewage came. So whole Castries was sewaged, which was the first time for all these years. So these were the benefits after all the detrimental benefits was that everything became in concrete now, which is better, safer for fire. And then we got services which we didn't have before, like the sewage service.
A certain politician, I can see him right there in front of me, blessing in disguise. And to me, really the meaning may be, I don't know, I might be wrong. It's like saying, well, a lot of things had to change because of the fire. And he felt it was a very good thing the fire came. Maybe if the fire had not come, we would not have sewage system. Maybe we'd have all the old houses still around.
A number of my friends used to stay in the barracks. And they stayed in the barracks for a long time. Because when I left Ave Maria and I went to the convent, my friends used to come down. They were bussed into town. Yes, they were bussed into town from these barracks. Until they built the CDC buildings. They gave persons who landowners priority. I was at the Ave Maria school, a little girl going to Ave Maria school, and they were building. And first time you saw these huge white men, well, to a little girl, they were huge. Bareback with vests and their boots and short pants. And then little girls used to leave the school and go and watch them. And what fascinated us was the pumps. There was a lot of water. I'm saying, but there was no rain and there was a lot of water. And they were pumping all this water, and then it's only years later, when I was doing geography and so on, I learned that Castries was built on water.